Hi everyone, I would like to welcome you all to our event this evening. My name is Victoria Fielding. I'm the Deputy Chair of the Australian Fabians, and I wanted to welcome you to this forum in Zoom form, and thank you for taking some time out of your evening from your ISO world to join us. So if you aren't already a member of the Australian Fabians, we promote greater equality of power, wealth and opportunity. And we would love to invite you to join us to further advance progressive ideas. So before we start, I would like to acknowledge we meet today on Aboriginal land all over Australia. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and contribution to make the Australian life what we all know it is today. And we also acknowledge all other First Nations people on whose lands we gather. So today we're going to be moderated in the discussion with Linda White by Leon Cermak. I'd like to introduce Leon to you now. He's our South Australian convener of the Fabians and a national board member. He is also a branch councillor at the Australian Services Union. And just to add to his list of accolades, he's also recently been elected the National Campaign Coordinator for the Labour Environment Action Network. So he's a very busy person. And he is going to now introduce our guest speaker, Linda. Thanks, Leon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Victoria, for introducing me. And again, I'd like to pay respects to elders past and present. I myself today am on Kaurna land, and all of us here, Fabians members, when we have events in Australia, we recognise that we enjoy immense privilege that came at the expense of our First Nations people, not just traditional custodians of this land, but the inhabitants and owners of this land. And it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We're really honoured and excited to have Linda White here with us today. So I first got to know Linda very briefly at an ASU branch council meeting and was blown away, as I think pretty much everyone in the room was, with her just general knowledge around everything to do with corporate governance through to union action, union organising. You've probably seen her on the TV in the last couple of weeks talking about the plight of Virgin staff and others who have been at this stage largely left behind by the government. And you might have even seen her back doing a lot of work for Ansett workers in the past, the last time we went through a similar crisis. But yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Linda.
My pleasure.
Oh, beautiful. It's always a good one when everyone's webcams are working. Well, maybe if it's all right with you, I'll just get you to really quickly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what your role is with the ASU nationally.
Sure. So I'm an Assistant National Secretary of the ASU, and I do a whole range of different things, and I've done a whole range of different things for quite a while. So I have had principal carriage for us nationally over airlines for a long time, including, this will show how old I am, back when Ansett collapsed. So, but I've done and been involved in airlines for our airlines members for a long time. So we're one of the larger unions in airlines, and we have members in most ground handlers, pretty much all the airlines as well, both overseas carriers and also the domestic carriers here. And I also have done quite a bit of work on the social and community services, and was the national coordinator when we got the equal pay case up back in 2012 and before that. And currently I'm doing really a lot more work about campaign and growth for the union, and have done quite a lot of work on member retention and particularly for the union. And also we launched in the last couple of years an online platform for learning for our members, which has been highly successful and is coming into its own currently. So I wish I'd done it commercially. But it's a fantastic resource for ASU members, and in this time of lockdown, it's really coming into its own.
I did 3 of the courses myself, originally just to trial them and see how they were before I went around recommending them as a workplace delegate, but then they actually turned out to be great. And so I went through a couple, and I know it's been really helpful for members now as everyone is struggling.
Yeah.
I think we might kind of launch straight into it. And
Yeah, sure.
you mentioned your excellent work with Virgin and Ansett Australia. And I mean, it's been really difficult, not just for the workers of Virgin, but Qantas and other domestic and international airlines. We've seen their large proportions of the workforce stood down. What is it like at the moment for workers on the front line?
Oh, look, it's really very, very difficult because, airlines are, because of the closing of the borders, uh, and both domestically and internationally, that has had a devastating effect. But airlines is fundamentally a confidence kind of business, and so if people's confidence is low, then they don't tend to fly, and it can bounce back fairly quickly. But this is kind of obviously unprecedented. But there have been multiple pandemics where people stop flying. Since I've been doing it, but it does tend to, nothing compares to this though, right? Probably the closest thing is post September 11, where flying was, certainly international flying was stopped pretty quickly. But the thing that the profound thing, I guess, for the workforce is lots of these people, particularly who work for Qantas, and also for Virgin and other carriers, they are long-term employees who probably haven't seen unemployment before. And so the effect on them is quite devastating because they have not, probably plenty of them have never been unemployed. There'd be different in different companies. The ground handlers are probably slightly different. Ground handlers are kind of independent companies who handle airlines at airports. Their workforce might be slightly different, but people who work at Qantas and even numbers of them at Virgin have been there. So Virgin since the startup, and at Qantas have been there years and years and years, and so they would not have had a situation where they have had such long periods without income and the sort of uncertainty that it brings. So it is pretty, like, it's devastating for everyone, for everyone, no doubt about it. But it is. Because it's such a confidence business, it's hard to figure out. Well, nobody can guess when it's going to come back, and if the borders open, will people fly? And I think the other thing that they'd have to be considering is, well, now that everybody's used to doing video conferencing and webinars and the like, are people going to fly domestically for day-long meetings, which is the backbone of some of the business? So it's very challenging, and airlines is a tough business anyway, right? It's just probably got to go to another new level of toughness and difficulty.
Yeah, and I guess when you compare it with the Ansett collapse, which was whilst just after September 11, I mean, there seemed to be a lot of institutional issues with the way Ansett was structured, amongst other things, and problems with Air New Zealand. But yeah, with Virgin, it's not just the case that when you talk to a worker, they've lost their job, but it's often they've lost their job. They were the one with the stable job, and they've got 2 or 3 other people in their family that maybe stood down in hospitality, retail, public sector, anywhere else. What lessons? Oh, sorry.
There you go.
I was just going to launch straight into the next question, really, of what lessons do you think we did learn from the Ansett collapse this time around? I guess we being the government, but also possibly the union movement. And what do you think we should have learned that we probably haven't?
Well, look, Ansett was going to go into administration anyway, right? So I think that the plan, the board had already met the weekend before September 11, and so they were going to go into administration. They were probably going to try and trade out like Virgin did, but the intervening act was, the plane slamming into buildings, which basically then started the domino effect, and the domino effect being that Singapore Airlines, didn't want to support Air New Zealand anymore. They were the owner of Air New Zealand, and Air New Zealand then said Ansett, like the domino, was the last one that fell over, and it basically never got up again. And I don't think there was any intention for. I think they wanted to trade out. They were in, it was really a failure of policy on many fronts, I think, too. It had News Corp had been a shareholder. They'd bled it dry. They didn't understand their business. The government really had a poor aviation policy, and so I think what happened after that, you saw the nationalisation of Air New Zealand. So, and that was a smart thing. What the New Zealanders understood, which we have failed to understand, is that aviation is really important and critical to us. And to kind of talk about, which has annoyed me no end recently, is the federal politicians talking about the market. I mean, we're a spoke at the end of a hub, like we're at the end of the earth, and every time you have overseas carriers that own a vital thing like Virgin, when difficulties happen, as they periodically do, they run back to where they came from. Singapore Airlines run back to Singapore. Etihad run back to Dubai, right? And the Chinese company that is also significant run back to China, because that's where the main problems are. And so we never learned anything out of Ansett, because that's exactly what happened. Basically, the aviation policy has been neglected. We think that somehow it's all fair and the market will adjust. Well, if it's a vital industry, it's crazy to think somehow that you're going to leave it to the market and you don't have government intervention. And so basically what happened in Ansett is happened again with Virgin. They're overburdened with debt. They were always looking like they were in deep trouble, but all they needed was a small push to tip them over. And this was a big push, but that's what was going to always happen when you looked at it. And the shareholders weren't going to put in any further capital, and yet 40% of Australians' domestic flying is controlled. The government has no control over it, and so they make a commercial decision, and we are where we're at, right? And when you look at it, the only way that people are going to get their entitlements in Virgin is the sale of assets. And when you look at what the assets are, they might just be planes, right? And this is not exactly the time to be selling planes. All of that is very similar to what happened in Ansett. The reasons might be slightly different, but there are serious things that are the same about it. And we failed to have an aviation policy that addresses that, because apparently the market is going to do it. Well, the market has decided yet again, and that we didn't learn any lessons. And it annoys me no end that aviation policy is so important and nobody gives stuff about it and doesn't look at it really sensibly about how it is. And you look at around New Zealand, they nationalise because they realise who's going to fly to New Zealand when the shit hits the fan? No one, right? 43 airlines have got the rights to do so, but they ain't going to fly there. If commercially it's not viable. Every other country who's nationalised, even Alitalia, which has been a basket case as long as anyone can remember, they're nationalising it. The land of the free, home of the brave, have put $15 billion into airlines, and it's got you cannot fly domestically in the US if you're owned by a foreign owner, and that is the home of capitalism. And we have failed to learn those lessons. There's a long answer, but it really annoys me because I just see it's going to happen periodically unless somebody who understands what our place in the world is, and that the market is imperfect and it gets worse it gets worse with these major things that happen periodically. So that's my We
that's
didn't
a great
learn.
answer.
We didn't learn a thing.
The market might be efficient for sometimes allocation of capital, but not really for social good.
Well, not for things that we depend on, right? And in a country like ours, it's an island that we just depend on for significantly for transport of both people and goods. Why would we leave it to the market? It's crazy.
Yeah, so I've had a really good question kind of on the topic from Hamish McPherson saying that airlines, healthcare and education, is it time that we move towards, again, I guess a campaign for public ownership and democratic planning of essential services?
Well, you have to start questioning that. I think so. It's really, what do you value? Otherwise, we're going to repeat ourselves over and over if we don't actually see what the value of things are, and that the government has got a role. And I do think people are should be thinking about, well, what is the role of the government? What do we expect? How do we expect to get through things? And we shouldn't, we can talk about the rhetoric of we're all in this together, but we're all in this together as taxpayers and providing everybody with the ability to get through very difficult times. And that shouldn't just be where it's a pandemic. It should be in time for a whole range of policy settings. And then we can see, as I said, you can see what's going on in the US. The whole thing's collapsing because you can't depend on the market when the shit hits the fan. Sorry, that's a technical term, but you know what I mean.
That's a great term. Well, one of the, I guess, early things that we saw airlines do and many other businesses across Australia was go and use Section 524 of the Fair Work Act that enables employers to stand down employees kind of exceptional circumstances. Seems like a pretty difficult section to have in a Fair Work Act if your goal is to ensure that job security and other things like that are important. Like we go through an EB negotiation, unions and employees make trade-offs. Maybe we take a smaller pay rise or something so that we can guarantee job security, but then it can all get thrown out the window during a crisis. Do you think we do need to look at possibly reviewing the Fair Work Act? And it's a loaded question because I know you do.
Yeah, look, I think that this is exceptional time. Stand downs are not really designed for the stand down provision is not really designed for months on end, which is potentially what's going to happen to a range of people. It's just not designed for that. It's really a short-term crisis that can be resolved. That's really how it's been used in the past. It's not, nobody can find anything that says that this clause has been used for such protracted periods for significant parts of the workforce, and it is really, and then how it interacts with JobKeeper and the like is really quite difficult, and it then gets down to, well, stand down. What we're addressing at the moment is in some of these airlines, there is work to be done. They might not be flying, but there is work to be done. So how can you stand down somebody when there is actually things? So for instance, the engineers are running a case with Qantas saying, well, look, actually all these planes do need to be maintained and there's a whole lot of work that was backlogged. Why can't they be doing that? And it really isn't about it's not about the work not being available, is we don't want to pay anybody to do anything at the moment. That's really what it's about. And I do think it requires a serious rethink about that provision, because it's not fit for purpose currently. And it is, but for JobKeeper, what would have happened? A serious number of people will be for months on end. And, at Qantas, you'd have to say a significant part of the workforce and in airlines is going to be stood down, and particularly those overseas carriers, for maybe till the end of the year. And it'll all come to a head, I guess, when JobKeeper, and so they're forced to use their own entitlements. Currently, that's what they were doing. Prior to JobKeeper, forced to use their own entitlements to make ends meet, and that certainly is not a fair way to deal with this. And as I said, I don't think it's fit for purpose and needs a serious review.
Yeah, and I mean, it was a massive and amazing campaign by the union movement to get the JobKeeper payment done, which we know the government did not support at the start, but there's pretty much everyone by the government's acknowledging some pretty serious gaps in it. I saw just yesterday there was talk of one of the major service providers at airports being ineligible for JobKeeper payments for their staff, but having already paid some of them. Do you want to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So that's Donata. So Donata probably employs about 6,000 people. And before this, we're very large in Donata. They do ground handling. So they do the baggage and the check-in for large numbers of international carriers, lots of them in many airports. They also do catering. They now own which was an Australian show called Alpha Catering, and they also bought Qantas Flight Catering. So Donata is owned by Emirates, which is owned by the UAE government. So in the small print in the JobKeeper, legislation, if you're a sovereign entity, if you're employed by a sovereign entity, you don't get JobKeeper. So a sovereign entity is defined as somebody who's owned by a foreign government. So those Donata companies are actually Australian companies. So there are quite a few. It's a little technical, but I'll explain. So Thai Airways is a sovereign entity, but it's a foreign company. It's not registered in Australia. So people who work for Thai are not eligible for it. So Donata, which is a series of registered Australian companies and has had a history of Australian ownership, but currently is owned technically by the UAE government. Anybody who works for them is not entitled to it because they're defined as a sovereign entity. And last Friday, so the tax department told Donata that they were eligible because they're Australian taxpayers and they do pay tax here. And then they changed it. They changed they changed the rules and said, oh no, well, even if they do pay tax and they're not a foreign company, then they do have to. Then their employees are not eligible for JobKeeper. Now that seems ridiculous. So it was really somehow the UAE government is responsible for 6,000 people who work at Donata. They're responsible for their payments, and so it doesn't really take into account that all of those people who work there are entitled to, been paying their taxes and working in their jobs, but because of who owns them. And there'll be a series of them. Now, it may not have been necessarily aimed at Emirates and these airlines. It's probably owned at wholly owned Chinese agricultural companies, is my theory, that are owned by the Chinese government. And this is a kind of sneaky way to have a shot back at them. But it's really the devastation that those people who the company thought, the company got an indication from the tax department that they made forward payments to people thinking that they were covered, and they're not. And they may be, so I'm not sure whether the UAE government's going to bail them all out. I don't think so at the moment because of their history. So yeah, it's a really, it sounds good, So it might, sorry, it doesn't sound good. It might appeal to people, out there in the wide world, well, why should we support foreign governments? But like, this is 6,000 Australians who have worked long and hard at these companies who are not going to get JobKeeper and who are real and didn't apply for Job Seeker because they got an indication from the ATO that it will all be fine, and it ain't. And it doesn't seem fair that's been meted out on them. But there's more than them that are affected. And as I said, I think that they weren't the main target, but they've been caught in the crossfire.
Oh, yeah, totally. And I mean, you mentioned job seeker payment, which I've had a couple of questions around job seeker and how it really isn't a fit for purpose payment. Anyway, there's a lot of paternalistic requirements on people to undertake behaviours that, while suspended now, people will be, again, and we assume at this stage in about 6 months, forced onto a lower rate that is significantly below the poverty line with all of these, like, it's bad enough job seeker when there's about 7 to 10 job seekers per vacancy in Australia. If we get up to probably 50, you are going to have basically a resume spamming exercise so people can live below the poverty line. I think we need to do as a progressive movement to try and push for a long-term improvement to the way we treat people who aren't in the workforce.
Well, if there is, maybe I'm an optimist, but I actually think that this period might change people's minds about this and realise how fragile things really are, and that, for want of a better word, ordinary people like them can find themselves beyond their control in a situation where they depend on money from the government, and that money has to be adequate, and that the red tape and all of these things that people have complained about and the poor tests and the like are issues that have become very real to a whole bunch of people who never thought it would, right? And I think that's when you've got to get that lived experience and try and make change, right? Because people might not have had that lived experience in the recent past, and so that lived experience, I think, is really how we can change. And I think also, talking of not fit for purpose, some of the way in which we talked about the sovereign entity issue, but the JobKeeper does not really understand the way it's been constructed for casuals and for people on visas. It doesn't understand how the modern workforce operates, and that people have multiple jobs, that they don't necessarily stay all the time for 12 months, and that longevity and the way is a thing of the past. And the number of people who have been captured and who are not eligible, who do have, who have had real jobs and have worked all the time, and yet they aren't captured because of how long they'd worked for someone or how they'd structured their work is I think just shows how out of touch those who designed this scheme are from what is actually going on in the economy. But it also, I think, again, being the optimist, this is going to really, I think, assist us in the union movement with the views that we have expressed significantly about insecure work, right? And how our economy is structured and why secure work and the balance being shifted to workers rather than workers taking the risk for capital. I think that is something that we've got to harness and that we've got to be smart about bringing home people's now lived experience as to why we've been saying all these things, because it has played out in a way that they may never have contemplated would happen.
Excellent. We just had a question come in that was pretty similar to something I was going to ask anyway, but interested in your view on whether this is going to be a power shift between the balance, I guess, between capital and labour, workers and unions, and whether we start to look at radical Central European model of having staff elected members or union appointed members on corporate boards, or whether that diminishes union organising power, things like banning stimulus packages and payments to corporations that use tax havens, conversation around negative gearing and franking credits again, even though it's still a little bit traumatic for many of us. Do you think there are any radical solutions we should potentially start looking at, or are we still fighting the immediate crisis?
Well, look, from the ASU's point of view, we have grown dramatically. No, we have absolutely grown dramatically in the last 3 months, unprecedented, and so you would have thought, well, would people, and even in industries where people have been suffering significantly, and we're trying to get to the bottom of that, but it's really, and we are not finding people resigning because they think the unionism value. And so I think, I do think, well, we're trying to figure out what is the question that people said, and the answer was union. I mean, I always think the answer is union, but it is really, and we're seeing a lot of younger people joining. And we are seeing, as I said, people who are in industries that are under threat, who go, oh my God, I need to get on top of this. I need to understand. I think that's what they're saying. We're going to look at this more closely. So if we're experiencing that, and we are not seeing resignations at the same level as we thought we might, and we're not seeing as many people saying that they're financially distressed and they want to give up their union membership, which I think are all pointers for change, frankly. That is, we're saying something or we're representing something that people think is really important. I think also people are craving, so I talked about our launchpad, they are craving the ability to get knowledge and understand and try and fit. We had a record number of people wanting to understand JobKeeper. We have had a whole lot of people wanting to understand a whole lot of things that they might not ever have thought before. And I think that we have to capture that moment. I think that, and I think we can, if we are giving clear information, clear and talking to people, because that's what they're craving. So I do think, I think there are some things that are going to be hard to talk about, but there are some things we are going to have to do it, and we have to talk about tax. We have to do it but I think there's a moment here where people go, right, we cannot exist without a government that can do things and that will do things and that understand the needs of people. And if we don't capture that money, I do think things are going to change significantly, and are changing significantly, and people's mindset will be. And if we don't do big, deep thinking about this and start thinking about and putting out ideas and garnering support, then we are wasting an opportunity, and I do think that is. So I think tax, a whole lot of things, and we do have to start that whole view about well, how do you fund government? How do we do it? How do we intervene? Who pays for it? And do we want to pay for it? And of course, and people must contrast, as they have in the past, but it's stark now, the health system here versus the health system in the US. And what's the difference? It's the funding. And are we adequately funded? No, we could do with a lot better. But I do think that's, if we don't do those sort of conversations, who is going to? And if we don't try and garner support and start putting things back on the table and talk about it, then as I said, I think it's a lost opportunity. The other thing I think that we seriously have to do is I've talked about the policy failure in aviation, but there are going to be policy failures and so what is Australia going to be good at after this? We've seen the failure because we didn't have manufacturing. So do we want to get manufacturing? What are we going to concentrate on? And I think the more voices that we put into those sort of, well, what do we want Australia to be like post this, the more voices that are in that and the more policy that we put out there and the more thought that we put into it, the better, because this is a serious opportunity and we don't want to be left behind, that it is going to be somehow determined by where capital thinks they might put it in. And you know, the biggest amount of capital in Australia that we could garner is in our superannuation funds, who are under attack. And what we should be doing is getting them into the game about how we want to see Australia in the future. As I said, maybe I'm a glass half full person, but I do see opportunity in this, born through some bad times for a lot of people, but that will focus them on, well, do we want to ever go through this again, and how do we not go through this again?
Yeah, anecdotally, we had a few questions people were submitting that were kind of discussing the reduction in apathy is probably the way that people were framing it, going, poor working conditions for quite a while, had kind of grown a bit apathetic to it and accepted it as the status quo. But this crisis has really demonstrated how bad things can get and the opportunities for collective action to try and remedy some of those things. One of the best, I think, union campaigns of the last 20 years would have to be the Ero Case. Love you to tell our listeners today a little bit about the success of the Ero Case and why it's under threat now, and then, yeah, follow on from there.
Sure. So the equal remuneration case delivered between 23 and 47% pay rises to people working in the non-government social and community services sector. The decision was in 2012, and the final payment is to be made at the end of this year in December. So that's a lot of money. So some people in our ranks in those sort of jobs have had pay rises over this time of about $450 to $500 a week, which is unprecedented. They would have been there. And so we ran a pay equity case. It took us 6 years to get from the conceptual idea of them being poorly paid to running the case and being successful. And then the Gillard government funded it, and actually, with great foresight, put that funding into legislation. So it had to be funded ongoing, the funding, it was tied to the pay rises, which were every December, and they also got the safety net pay rise in July. So they've got 2 pay rises a year, which is unprecedented. Mind you, there's a gender pay gap of those sort of amounts, and so it was really redressing the gender pay gap. But it took a massive campaign. It took 6 years, and it wasn't just running a case. It was a political campaign that started prior to the 2007 election, and it was a mobilising campaign to mobilise people. And we, I guess, capitalised on a situation at the time, which was significant numbers of state governments being Labor and the federal government, and we utilised, I guess, people power, but we had to make it public because the federal government didn't really want to do it unless it looked like people cared about it. And so they did care about it, and they did rally, and they did a whole lot of things, and we got this and it has moved the gender pay gap dial significantly, I would have thought. A couple of percent, I would think, would have to be because of that. It's under threat now because the legislation funding that pay rise, the final pay rises, runs out, and the federal government is literally saying at the moment that they're not saying they're going to fund it post July next year. And so I think we've got a kind of, we were ramping that up again, and we are going to ramp that up. It's been stopped at the moment because of the current situation, but we just see that it won't mean that they go back to the lower pay rates. What it means is that the organisations, if they want to pay people at the right level in their classification structure, will have to find the money themselves. And what history tells us is that they don't do that. They just classify people below what their job means. And so that is a significant significant threat for us. And so part of somehow we were we had embarked on a campaign to bring that up for this, really starting with the budget that was supposed to be in May, and then, but the next May is probably what would have been more likely. We were ramping that up, and it's gone on to hold at the moment. And so, and we could just kind of get, I suppose, we're getting the band back together to do it, but it is really going to be overlaid by these, it's going to be because of what's been spent on JobKeeper and a range of other things. I can see it being under a lot of threat, which is not going to be great, because those services are going to be under even more strain as we come out of the pandemic, the immediate pandemic issues, and then face the issues of recession and unemployment. Those services are just going to be at the forefront, and it's going to be like I think they're going to have unprecedented demand, and then also have their funding issues and their equal pay funding in question.
Yeah, and I mean, the ASU covers a lot of disability workers and social and community sector workers who have had a lot of trouble getting basic things like PPE equipment on the front line. Tell us a little bit about the union's recent campaign around that. Yeah,
look, certainly, it has been extremely difficult to get that, and we have had to. They've sort of been a bit forgotten. They had been forgotten. We had to bring that to the forefront to the government, that really they are the NDIS, the funding had got to take that into account, that numbers of programs had been cut, but in the personal interaction that people have in the disability space meant that they were concerned, their clients were concerned, exactly the same sort of things that people have been expecting in healthcare and also in aged care. They were being forgotten, but we've brought that, certainly. We've banded together with the peak groups that represent the employers, and I guess on a unity ticket have said that this is extraordinarily important, and that the risks and the way in which people interact with their workers is required, because it's not an option not to go to work.
Yeah,
to go to work. And so I think we've had some success. It's taken a bit of time to do that, but we have got some success, and certainly a little more of an acknowledgement. And we're in the midst of we're going to try and get a paid leave case as well. And I think we'll get government support for that. We're still working on that, but I think that's going to happen. But it really has helped us. I guess it's sort of the same principles that we used in the equal pay case. And I think that we have to use going forward more generally is that you've got to get a coalition of the willing and just keep pushing on it and keep and just pummeling government. And getting a whole lot of, and talk to state governments and doing all the things that we had done previously in the social and community services equal pay case. And you can be successful, but you've got to mobilise people as well. A good idea is not just going to get you. A good idea is a good start, but mobilising people and being relentless is what gets it in the end.
Yes, putting the organising in organising, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
What do you think we can do? You mentioned before that a lot of the people that are bearing the brunt of the crisis are young people, especially young women by far overrepresented in people losing their jobs and being casual and unable to access JobKeeper. So what do you think we can do as a movement, I guess, to adapt to a changing workforce that is seeing casualisation is just through the roof, and this crisis has really highlighted more than anything that the casualised workforce is not a protected workforce?
Yeah, look, I have been thinking a lot about this. I do think that we are that we have got to be really careful that we don't have a gendered response to getting out of the crisis, and that we don't just default to let's put money into infrastructure and into blokes' jobs. I think that is a real risk, and I think that. And we do really particularly need to be really careful about that. And we have to have smart responses that looks at the workforce that it is as it was, but also that men and women are participating, and that we have to make sure any responses that we have that capture all parts of the workforce. And also, yeah, I think that there is a real opportunity to address these issues about insecure work, because people have lived it and understood now that the structures that they've been working under are way worse, and that there is different levels of the workforce. There's a hierarchy that sees them at the bottom, and it's been come into stark contrast. And I think that is really, there's an opportunity for us to reshape how the workforce operates if we take it on. I don't think it's necessarily going to be easy, but I think that we have to take it on, because this has just highlighted the serious hierarchy of labour that we've been experiencing, and those at the bottom will never get to, are just being exploited over and over again. And that, I think that we have to address that, and we cannot let it continue. We have to organise people, and we have to say that there is hope to change. And I think there is hope to change, and we just got to mobilise. And as I said, a lived experience is what's going to bring it home to lots of people really significantly.
Yeah, we've got a great question here from Ella Waters, one of the local government organisers here in South Australia for the ASU, around local government workers in South Australia not being able to access JobKeeper. And there's kind of a simultaneous pressure from elected members and management at local councils and local governments to aim for 0% rate increases, expecting that there could be potentially significant job losses, as well as cuts to service. Things like libraries, youth workers, social workers, the people that you kind of want to have working as we're rebuilding. What do you think we can do, like people on this call, to support those sorts of essential services?
Well, I do think that it certainly is, it's stark across the country in local government. So you're also seeing, again, the casualised workforces who work at leisure centres, swimming pools, libraries. All of those people are the ones that are bearing the full brunt of it, and yet have been the backbone of some of the things that people really enjoy about the services that are provided by local government. And I'm perplexed why there hasn't been more support. So New South Wales, the Liberal government and also the councils there have at least put some subsidies towards those sort of people and taken a completely different approach. But across the rest of the country, they are not doing that. And it just seems ridiculous, again, because they were in the most precarious employment, but the things that lots of people would have accessed, they are at the bottom of it, and yet they don't get JobKeeper either. It just seems like this, again, a failure to understand how the workforce operates, a failure to understand what we're doing, and that also you've got to, you pay for services, and that when you cut rates and the like, it's a short-term gain for long-term pain, and the pain will be local government. Lots of people, work for local government who live in their own communities, and it just doesn't. There's a failure to understand what they do until they don't do it, and then that they are, and certainly regional councils, they are usually the biggest employer of the people in their towns and their areas, and often subsidise agriculture by having one member of the family working in the local council to make ends meet. And to not kind of recognise that, to me, is just, it's a failure to understand how things operate. And that's, I think there's lots of things about the response that we've seen that doesn't, it's set in a world of the past rather than how the workforce operates currently. And our job, I think, is, well, as I said, people's lived experience, is to say, well, our response getting out cannot be about the past, but about how we want to frame the future and have the future.
Yeah, excellent answer. We've got a good question. Another one from Hamish McPherson about methods of union organising that we can use. I guess individuals that maybe delegates or union members can use in their own workplaces to try and, I guess, harness the opportunity for collective action. And we've seen the organic growth, I guess, of union members across Australia during the crisis. But what can individual union members do to, I guess, work collectively in organising workplaces that perhaps do not have traditional strong union density?
Well, you've got to capture the opportunity. We've run lots of these Zoom meetings. We did one with a mass meeting of Virgin members last week for members and non-members, and we as a union captured people from that. It is talking to people about the things that they want to know about and being relevant to them. I always wonder what the tipping point is for people. As I said, we've got mass growth at the moment and among younger people. So what was the question that was in their head that the answer was union? That's what we've got to kind of figure out. And that is quite hard, and it changes. But being upfront with people, talking to them about the issues and that they experience, and often people don't expect you to fix everything, but they want to understand what they could do and how things might go. And I think for unions, that's important. We are, I think post lockdown, we will be utilising these kind of webinars, because it's a mass way. People often don't have time to have meetings or come to somewhere, or they're frightened about it. But the number of people that we have engaged with over webinars who have said, yeah, I want to be in the union, I didn't really understand. And again, I think unions are the ability to exercise collective power about a whole lot of things, and I think people see that. We talked about our little launchpad thing that we do, not so little, but we do that. But the collective buying power, the information, all of those things. I think people are seeing, again, the rhetoric that the government is putting out about we're all in this together. That is going to, I think, help collective organisations a lot. And I do think we've got to harness it, but we also have to talk to people in a way that they want to be talked to. If they can't get to a meeting, you do a webinar. And as I said, our experience recently has been that we've been into workplaces virtually like this, way more than we would ever have done if we knocked on the door and tried to have a meeting and do all the traditional things. And that's what we're going to have to, like lots of organisations, realise that the way in which people interact may change in some ways forever, and that we've got to utilise it.
Yeah,
and have meaningful conversations and convert people. And we're finding that we are doing that a lot, but coming to people in a way that most suits them, rather than imposing on them, saying, oh, well, we can't do anything because we can't have a meeting. Well, that ain't going to fly at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think about, I guess it's pivoting a little bit, but working on is it worth the union movement spending a bit of time working on a job seeker and also job keeper extension campaign? So trying to get the government to guarantee that it will continue until such a time as employment returns to whatever level?
Look, I absolutely do, but I think we're also going to have some serious challenges because, our friends, the Liberal Party, although hostilities, happiness has broken out, they certainly, the hard noses among them are already talking about why we need industrial relations reform and why, workers need to bear the fuller brunt than capital in bringing Australia back. And that's what worries me is that we are going to, we're going to have a fresh run of at the Fair Work Act. We're going to have, everybody's going to take pay cuts so that we can stimulate the economy, etc. And some will say it just for the sake of saying it, rather for ideological reasons rather than for reality. And I think that is going to be that's certainly going to be our threat, but certainly it's not all suddenly going to bounce back. The economy is not going to bounce back just suddenly either. And I do think that people who have had the lived experience are going to be more likely to go, yeah, well, we should be keeping it at a higher level because it's only fair and people's lives were affected by something that was beyond their control. And that will hopefully morph into it being. And for us, for the union movement, yes, I think the whole way in which we operate, we cannot be bystanders and let it happen. We have to have things like, well, what is our opinion about industry policy? What is our opinion about how we want to see people who be supported? How do we say wages and conditions? What do we do about the gender pay gap? What do we think about superannuation? Again, another thing that's going to be which is under serious threat, you know. They're trying to turn, and they've wanted to do this for a long time, turn, you know, superannuation into like an ATM, when it was supposed to be, you know, it's a significant contributor to the economic well-being of Australia, and we're going to turn it into, go down to get money out, and it's hard to counter those sort of arguments. So we're going to have to use all of our might and power and thought process to explain to people why it's not a great idea to take from your superannuation savings, because it'll mean you can potentially be in poverty in retirement. So I think there's significant challenges, but this is not the time for bystanders. This is the time to get right in there and put opinions, because nobody's got, like, I don't think there's one right idea in all of this. And if we don't, this is the time for ideas to shine and for policy to absolutely be at the forefront. And those of us who think about these things have got to be out there and do things and get coalition of the willing and force change. Otherwise, you know, we will have a policy vacuum, and we won't do the best by the other citizens of Australia.
Oh, I've got a great question about what do we do with people in low-paying jobs, or not every job, I guess, that have grown up in a society where unions are generally shouted about quite negatively in most of our mainstream media. How do we go about changing the minds of these low-paid people to demonstrate that unions aren't actually evil constructs designed to ruin your life? It's kind of the eternal question, but I guess the follow-up for it would be something about what do we do with people that haven't been union members for a long time that now join and get all of the services that a lot of union members that have been members for 10 or 20 years go, hold on a sec, I've paid dues for 20 years and this person's getting the same help as I'm getting during a crisis?
Well, yeah, look, I mean, that's the perpetual problem that you do have, but I think that you're stronger the more people that you have in it, and how they get converted is, to me, is irrelevant. The thing is to retain them and to marshal them and to turn those people into activists, and you can, and that's what we've got to do, is go, well, righto, you've had an epiphany late, but oh well, that doesn't make you any less relevant. And to convince other members that, like, the stronger the numbers that we have, the stronger we're going to be. And I think that. Yeah, like, so we see lots of people who join in dispute, they've got some problem and they decide to join the union, but their expectations might be lower than we actually think, and they do stay. So we've looked at that very closely in our union, and they need people who help. They want help, and so I think I think that you don't get stronger in unions by turning people away just because they didn't see it earlier. I think we've got to marshal everybody, and you've got to make the union experience incredibly, that people want to join it. And as I said, at the moment, whatever the question is, the answer is union, because we are growing significantly. And so we've got to bottle that, and we've got to keep it going. I don't know if that's the right answer, but like I'm for trying to get everyone that we possibly can in and get them, and you've got to move people on a continuum. Not everybody joins initially, in my experience, because they want to be part of a collective, but it's our job as unions to move them from their individual issue to the collective good. And the longer that people stay in unions, the more they think about, okay, how do we change the world? What do we do? How do we look at the bigger picture? They don't just enter thinking that. They've got to see what you do, how we as a collective operate, and how we can make change. And even in tough times, we can make change. It could take a long time. As I said, the Sachs equal pay case, everybody who started that would going, we're never going to get this, they're never going to do it. They never thought that we would get, pay rises between 23 and 47%. And the people's pay would go up over 8 years, $450 a week for some of them. Like, who thought that? They would have thought you're dreaming. We weren't. We just relentlessly did it.
Now, we had a question or a couple of questions submitted from members of the Fabians Women's Collective about the substantial reported increase in family and domestic violence affecting women. Of estimates are at the moment around 40 to 50% increase. And it's horrible at any time, but especially when people are in isolation, it's just devastating. How can we support women that are in these positions and also support the workers that are being absolutely flooded with tragic cases at the moment?
Yeah, look, I think that we just got to keep doing what we're doing, which is publicising it, shining a light, and funding those workers at the front line, and funding and making sure those women who want to get out of those circumstances have the resources to do so. And that we do recognise that those workers who are dealing with this, we've got lots of them in the ASU, in family and domestic violence services, that they are properly funded. And some governments have just balked at that. They talk the talk, but walk the walk not so much. And I think that is, we've got to recognise that, and it's going to be money and resources and publicity, and that saying that this is not right, that we have got to just continue to push for paid family violence leave when people are back at work, but also funding the services is going to be critical to this. And as I said, I do think in social and community services, the worst is yet to come. I think this pandemic has shown for family and domestic violence, but it is with the economic pressure that is going to be bearing down on people, and the fact that the economy is not going to necessarily snap back, as some people might say, that is going to see it get worse and worse. And we cannot just ignore it and say it's par for the course. We have to realise those workers at the front line and the people affected have got to be supported, and we owe it to them.
Yeah, absolutely. You've also had it. You're probably not going to be too surprised by this. It's a regular Fabians thing to get quite a few questions about universal basic income, jobs guarantees, and wage subsidies. I guess without asking something too specific to start with, what do you think the role of potentially a universal basic income or a jobs guarantee may be?
Well, isn't everything on the table? Like, why wouldn't you? Like, if you're ever going to get those kind of big picture ideas, I don't know that I agree, but like, it's time to talk about everything, isn't it? Because things are not going to bounce back. The economy is not going to bounce back quickly. There's going to be global recession. Many people would never have seen it before. And in Australia, we've been sheltered a lot from this. And so if you want to make change, you've got to put all the ideas on the table. And this might be the time for that. It may be the time. I'm not a big supporter, but I don't think anything's wrong at the moment, because we don't know where we're going to end up. Like, to me, a day is like a week at the moment, and a week is like a month, right? So when you take that as a view, anything's possible, frankly. Who knows when we're out of it, and who knows what it is. But if we don't have some, well, it's not a time, as I said, for spectators, in my view. It's time to put everything out there, and I do think people will be looking for big ideas, and the only way we will come out of this better is if big ideas take hold.
It makes me eerily remember the ironically named 2020 summit that we had so many years ago, and it feels like a totally different world. But I guess sort of level of what society we want to see and how do we want to get there. I had a few questions. Sorry,
there's more opportunity now because people have got lived experience, right? We're probably complacent then, and I think now, I think, and even, you know, we got out of the GFC because of some smart policy ideas. And sometimes, you know, this sounds cruel and mean, but sometimes people have to suffer to recognise that you need big change.
I think one of the big themes that kind of this conversation is that government really, there is a lot of space for government to do substantially more to ensure that people aren't living in poverty, have reasonable job conditions protected by legislation. What do we do? How do we win an argument to honestly increase Australia's tax to GDP ratio? And we saw at the last election, the Labor Party shot down in flames, in part because of our policies around negative gearing and capital gains tax. What do we do? How can we equitably raise more funds if that is what we think we need to do? Sorry.
Yeah. So we did look at this. For my sins, I was on the review for the ALP for the election, and I think that we looked at this quite closely. You do have to you have to figure out when you put policy things up who's going to be affected and how vocal they're going to be. And I think we looked at it, some of those policies by one, they were hard to understand, and people got frightened, right? So there was a significant fear campaign. But I do think that you can explain things to people, but you have to take it sometimes a bit slower than we might have wanted to do in the last election. We had some false positives about it because nobody we put up a couple of policies before the last election, in the previous election, and nobody had really come at them. But I guess our opponents got a lot smarter and had a fear campaign about this. I think that, again, at the moment, things have changed a bit and people might not be like, it's got bad. Things are really bad now. And so, again, capitalising on how, and it's going to get worse, that's the time to start looking at this and setting the seed. I really don't believe that if people think that they're getting value for money on tax from their taxes, then they are happy to pay it. And you just got to connect the dots a bit more. And I think what we didn't do in the last election, or I think the analysis that we did is that we took for granted that people understood, and they really didn't understand it. And then a fear campaign that was a lot of misinformation on the franking credits, for instance, like what's that? Who knows? But apparently everyone had them, and that wasn't true. And yet you could spread misinformation. And so it's careful, simple, step by step is what we've got to do. But I do think the climate has changed quite a bit. And I think that we probably can't remember the bushfires, but the failure of government for the bushfires, maybe that's too far away now, but it'll be in a memory of enough people to go, wait a minute, how does the government intervene? Shouldn't the government have been in this a lot more? And I think we have to start putting those stark contrasts of failure to be able to point to the way through. I don't know if that's the right answer, but
Yeah, maybe we should all wear Hawaiian shirts at the Eden Monaro by-election, perhaps.
Well, I think Eden Monaro is going to be very interesting, that's for sure, because they were right in the fires, and it'll be interesting to see what people remember.
And we've kind of got one, maybe it might have to be one last question because they hit the 6 o'clock.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Time. I got a really good question from Jorge Navas, the Secretary of the Health Services Union here in South Australia. And so I guess a little bit about organising outside of workplaces in a sense, and how do you think this is a really good opportunity for us to mobilise people who have kind of left the workforce, so had been maybe long-term union members, maybe not, they've left the workforce now and are unemployed, and what can we do as a union movement to kind of engage those people and ensure their voices are heard so that when they do get jobs, they become union members?
So the ACTU is going to trial something like that very shortly. So they have got a view about that. That is, there are going to be bunches of people who are unemployed who might have been and that they're going to trial something pretty soon to try and capture those people, and then once they get jobs to also move them into unions. I think it'll be interesting to see how that works. But there's certainly been some thinking about that, and I agree too that the connection to collective shouldn't just be because people are in work, particularly in what we're about to face. And the ACTU is going to definitely trial that, and we want to see how it totally goes. But I think mobilise, it's the coalition of the willing, isn't it? And whether they're employed or not employed, that's what we've got to consider and do and action. Because, as I said, I think there's serious opportunities ahead, and organisations like the Fabians, union members, the political party, ALP members, this is going to be our time, in my view, and that's what we've got. We cannot be flat-footed or frightened. We have to give it a red-hot go.
Maybe I'll do a very last question just because it's so eloquently worded. Is there a danger that the ALP, as the political party representing trade union interests, will be seen as the natural opposition in the future because we've been a good parliamentary partner in a crisis, whereas everyone knows the LNP would be, this is a quote, utter bastards?
No, I don't know. I think their true colours will come from them shortly. We've helped them because there's a national crisis on, but they will revert to type. Right? They haven't had the epiphany. They're already, all their hard-nosed people are already still talking about super. Like I saw something ridiculous that idiot Tim Wilson said about how something that ME Bank was done was because of the liquidity crisis in three super funds. I mean, seriously, the guy is obsessed, and there's bunches of them that are obsessed. So I don't think that. I don't think that we will. I think that we will. I think they'll revert to type. And what I hope is that the good ideas that we bring to the table, the way in which we've operated during this crisis, and our vision for the future, both trade unions and the ALP, will actually, and people will see it because they've had, as I said, get back to it, the lived experience of the time, well, not just currently now, but what happens next, and they will revert to type for sure. They have not had an epiphany. They are not going to change their ways, and what we have to do is show the contrast and the vision that we have, and not only the vision but the ability to act it. And I think that we've seen that from some of our state premiers. They've done Labor proud, I think, and so that is what we've just got to keep doing and supercharge it, frankly.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your time, Linda, and for sharing your experiences with us. Really, really value. I'm sure you're completely sick of Zoom conversations, as many of us are, but it's still great to get so many people out. 50 on the call at the moment. We have about 70 listening on the Facebook stream as well. So that's fantastic.
I hope I'm on the chair of the Chifley Research Centre. We are going to supercharge what we're doing. We're a small show. We're the official think tank of the ALP, but we think it's our time. And for the Fabians too, it's our time. And we've got to take it and build on it. So I thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I feel like I'm talking to myself, but I see the number of questions. So I really appreciate the opportunity to say it. And if we can work, we should be working together and mobilising as soon as we can.
Yeah, excellent. And I encourage everyone listening, if you're not already a member, I've posted a link to the Fabians Become a Member section in the chat. Also, the Australian Services Union, not just Linda, but the entire organisation has just been indispensable in fighting for workers' rights during this crisis. And they will be there before, they were there before, and they'll be there after. And another union, if you're in a different area, but like every single person in this conversation right now, to take a pen or a keyboard or whatever it might be and write down the name of the two people that you are going to ask tomorrow to join their relevant trade union. Because this is what it is about. It is about every single person that is part of this movement, working and growing the movement, growing our power and our strength so that we can challenge these injustices and make sure we build the kind of society we want. Thanks so much, everyone. And thanks again, Linda and Victoria, for the introduction.